This computer. Welcome, Shonda. We're so glad that you're back with us today. A good friend to our church and a good partner in the work of justice throughout the East Bay. I treasured your message today, both the pastoral presence in this difficult moment, and also the call to look past what we're each suffering individually and to just to open our gaze outward in this moment and into the future, to the vision God has set before us. So thanks for being here with us today. I know you spend a lot of time with lots of different communities of faith and justice organizations helping us think with our hearts, minds, and souls more clearly about what our gifts are and how to put them to work to relieve suffering and to protect the vulnerable in the world. So psyched you're with us today. I told Shonda before a lot of you came in the room, Shonda's a good room reader, and if it seems like we need an hour plus, we can do that. If it seems like we're kind of winding down, the energy's going down, as it often does after staring at screens a lot, she'll sort of read the room and figure out when it's time to end. And I'm sure she'll leave lots of time for Q&A, either on the chat. You can ask questions, or live. Since there's only about 20 of us in the room, that's not too awkward to all jump in. Okay. Without further ado, Shonda, I'll mute myself and you're up.
Thanks so much. So y'all, what I was thinking I would do, I know some of you have been reading Transforming Communities, and some of you probably haven't had a chance to do that. So I wanted to do something that kind of worked for both crowds. So what I thought I would do this, well, it's afternoon now, is do a little bit on actually how First Christian Church of Oakland ended up becoming the Oakland Peace Center, because I don't talk about that a ton in the book, but it's kind of the background that shaped why I wrote the book. And, well, I do write about it a little at the very end of the book. And then I thought I would pause, check in with folks, and then if we have time and interest, I have some stuff we can reflect on related to asset-based community development and thinking about how connecting with the assets in our neighborhood can be a great tool for this congregation and for whatever organizations we're working with as we start building our justice strategies, or expanding our justice strategies in this church's case. So we might get to the asset-based part, or the conversation might go in different directions. So I thought I would start us there. And like I said, I'll do a little intro on how First Christian Church of Oakland became the Oakland Peace Center, and then check in with y'all before we move into anything more substantive. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's see, I'm going to hit that button. Thank y'all for bearing with me. So I wanted to share with y'all, some of you have seen this building. I've in fact given a tour to a couple of you of this building. This is the Oakland Peace Center. And the Oakland Peace Center is a collective of over 40 nonprofits, 12 of which are based in our building, who came together to collaborate in our shared vision of reducing violence in Oakland by focusing on building equity among the people of Oakland. The building itself is 40,000 square feet. This is an old slide. We asked our partners, and collaboratively across all of those organizations, the Oakland Peace Center network served over 100,000 folks. And our slogan at various points has been, "Together we can do more." Our slogan right now is actually "We need us," because times have gotten more urgent, but together we can do more. And to give you a little glimpse into that, let me know if this video works for you, just by maybe giving me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio once I hit play.
5 years ago, a number of nonprofits came together to create the Oakland Peace Center so that we could have a space to collaborate around creating access, equity, and dignity for all people, all creatures, and all creation as the means of creating peace in the Bay Area. We also play an important role in reducing the displacement of nonprofits in the Bay Area that serve the people at greatest risk of being displaced in our high rent market right now. Today, in the face of the threats of authoritarianism and injustice, it is easy for us to despair. But the great news is that the over 40 organizations that make up the Oakland Peace Center are doing amazing work to create peace and justice. And there are lots of ways for us to avoid falling into despair by connecting with their amazing work. Here's how they're taking a stand for peace in the face of hate and how you can help.
We're working for love and justice because we're defending the earth and the people who live on it. What we're doing to help that happen is defending the earth and trying to minimize the use of fossil fuels in the Bay Area. There are actually 5 oil refineries, and we have a great opportunity to try to restrict them from expanding to process the terrible tar sands coming in from Canada.
My son Darius was a young man who was murdered to senseless violence in the Grand Lake community of Oakland. And so to find another way of being angered by what happened to my son, I found a way to triumph over the hate by providing for others so that they don't have to turn to violence in times of need. They can come to us, Project Darius, to get the things that they need.
In the community, we gather low-income youth from the urban community and teach them the skills to move forward, like graphic design, yoga, music, spoken word, poetry, anything that the youth want to move forward and make sure it's a comfortable place for them to go to.
So here at Soul Shop, we work with students that are from kindergarten to 8th grade, and we teach them that it's okay to be mad or sad or frustrated or upset, but what's not okay is that they're taking those feelings out on themselves or other people. So we're giving them the tools to manage those feelings, because at Soul Shop, we believe that every student has the right to learn, the right to be themselves, and the right to be safe.
Niroga Institute brings dynamic mindfulness, mindful movement, breath work, and meditation to teachers, students, incarcerated youth, and other underserved communities. Dynamic mindfulness fosters empathy, stress resilience, which helps to build healthy neighborhoods, compassionate schools, and peaceful communities.
One of the many things Seeds does to make sure our collective love is bigger than our fear and hate is offering nature-based groups for children where they have the opportunity to practice awareness of their emotions, actions, and boundaries, to feel heard, to listen, to share, to recognize and care about their impact on others. This community-based offering is made available at a sliding scale fee to make it available to as many children as possible.
We believe in building community through art, peace, and harmony. We host events through the arts that promote art, peace, and harmony. Come and join us.
Please come and join us.
Please join us.
Please join us.
Join us.
Come join us and let's create peace in the community.
Breathing in, breathing out, benedictions only.
Together, we are building a community based on love, peace, and justice. We're doing this for ourselves, and we're doing it for people all over the country who need the hope that our work can inspire. Find your part in the movement so that together we can show the world that love really does trump hate.
So that's, let's see. So that's a little glimpse into the network that makes up the Oakland Peace Center. And that makes it look like, look at all these amazing folks working together, and isn't it great? But context is really messier than that. So here's the real story of how the Oakland Peace Center came into being, which I did not include in the book. That might end up being its own book. We'll see. So you've seen the physical space. And when I became the pastor of First Christian Church of Oakland, that picture is taken in 2003. I became the pastor in 2006. And by the time I was joining that church, there were 10 people in worship on an average Sunday. So about half of the number of folks gathered in that picture. In a worship space built for 700, in that 40,000 square foot building. So they had lots of room to stretch out. And early on in my time with them, I asked the question, what is it you want to be to this neighborhood? And the fact of the matter is, the one thing that we all had in common was we had all lost people in the streets. We all knew what the cost of violence was at a very personal level. The people in that congregation had lived in Oakland their whole lives, and had lived through white flight, had lived through the impact of the crack epidemic on that neighborhood, had lived through the boom and bust and what it had done to that community, as they held on to the legacy they believed they had inherited from that church back in its glory days, right? Back in the 1940s, when there were 1,500 people in worship on an average Sunday. So since the deep commitment was to creating peace, but also it was a mostly older congregation, people who were really tired of propping up that huge building all by themselves, we knew that we didn't have the energy to create stuff by ourselves. But we did have all that space, and we did have a commitment to supporting the folks in the community who were already on the front lines doing the work of peace. So we reached out and built relationships with folks like the Silence the Violence initiative that brought together youth from different turfs, right? Turf unity was their big focus. And we provided the space for their annual day of mourning all of the Oakland youth who had been lost to gun violence. And we started building relationships with Belinda, who you saw from the video, whose son was shot a couple of blocks from our church, and who, during Darius's funeral service, she got this word from God that she was supposed to start a food and clothing provision program in honor of her son, who had always taken care of people in need, so that no one in our neighborhood would need to turn to violence when they could turn to her and Project Darius instead. And so it started out with these few groups, plus a Mongolian man who had gotten lost because he didn't speak any English and wandered by the church building and heard the Korean language worship service going on, wandered into it because he did speak Korean, and launched First Mongolian Christian Church because of that connection. The Mongolian community was the newest immigrant group to the Bay Area and had very high rates of domestic violence, of alcoholism, of gang affiliation, of drug use. And so First Mongolian Christian Church emerged as a way of providing social services and the gospel to a community that, because they were the newest immigrant population, were at the greatest risk of falling into real danger and real violence in the community. In addition, we started connecting with others and figuring out how we could show up and support and help and provide space for a lot of nonprofits. And fast forward to 2010, we gathered about 20 of them to say, what is it you need? What is it you need from each other? What could this space do for you? What would it look like to have someone who was holding the container so that you could support, encourage, and strengthen each other in the high burnout work of being on the front lines of fighting violence in Oakland? And today, the Oakland Peace Center is a community of artists, activists, culture workers, educators, and nonprofits collaborating to bring about a city of hope, justice, nonviolence, and compassion. So that journey from 2005, when a handful of folks said, We think God's calling on us to address violence in our midst, and we don't have the energy to do it. So what do we do to support the people who have the energy to do it is what led to the Oakland Peace Center just celebrating its 8th anniversary and being poised this May to inherit the building so that we can heal the space and provide a cultural space in the midst of a neighborhood that is now going through a different kind of violence, the violence of gentrification. How do we create a space for our community in the midst of so much displacement and so much cultural violence that's going on to the fabric of that neighborhood that's seen so much? That's where we are today. So let me do a quick, so why did I write this book? For those of you who have read it, and hopefully it's useful for those of you who didn't. It was born out of that experience and also 20 years of community organizing that I've been involved with. And if any of you have ever been to Arizmendi Bakery, you may know that it is, which there's a couple of branches of, or if you've been to the Cheese Board Collective, it's part of the same network as Arizmendi, which is based in a couple of spots in Emeryville and Oakland. They're named after Father Jose Maria Arizmendi Areta, who was a priest in Spain during the height of the fascist regime in Spain. He was in an area that had resisted fascism, and therefore when the fascists took over, they made sure that that was the most under-resourced region in Spain. This priest gets sent to a Catholic parish, and within a week, the bishop is getting letters saying, get rid of this guy. He's a lousy preacher. He has no charisma. He's horrible in a crowd. He's not really that good in a small group. And what I love about Father Arizmendi is he reminds me that we sometimes get sucked into, this ties into the sermon this morning, we sometimes get sucked into the cult of personality. The big powerful leader, the big dynamic present, the charismatic person is who's going to save us. I know this congregation knows that to be a lie, but it's easy to get sucked into. And so Father Jose has become kind of my patron saint because he's a reminder to me that charisma and charm and worldly power are not the tools that God uses to affect change. Because this under-resourced community where the work of the folks in that community was constantly being exploited by the larger companies that hired them, the youth complained to Father Arizmendi they could barely patch together an existence. And Father Jose may not have had a lot of charisma, but he had some basic background in reading a room. Sociology is really what he was doing, but he could look around and be like, oh, I see what's going on. They know you have no more options, so they can pay you as little as they can get away with. What if instead we figured out how to make things and we co-owned the business that made them? This really simple strategy in an under-resourced community where the workers became the owners of the company, what we now refer to as cooperative businesses, was launched there. And now Spain's biggest company is the company that he founded, that he helped that community found. And the reason Arizmendi Bakery is named after him is because they were so inspired by the Mondragon Corporation, the largest employer in Spain, where all of the workers are also owners, that they replicated it here in Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, Emeryville. So this guy, partly because he could read context and he could bring together the community to find their own solutions, and partly because this guy had no charisma whatsoever, has become kind of my patron saint in the work that we do together. So when I worked on the book, Transforming Communities, I got together the case studies of places I have seen this kind of work happen, where regular people get together and find the solutions to the problems in their communities. And I won't go through all the chapters. Some of you have already read the book, but I focused on where asset-based community development has made a big difference. And I talked particularly about Baltimore because I spent a chunk of my young adult life there and was really moved by some of what was going on in the community I used to live in there. I talked about the power of one-to-ones, which is a traditional community organizing tool, because that really led to one of the most inspiring faith community initiatives I've been around, which is the Recovery Cafe in San Jose, just to our south, that was born out of First Christian Church of San Jose. Restorative justice, which some of us have seen working in our school districts, but actually emerged from Indigenous incarcerated people in Canada saying the current carceral justice system is not serving our community well, and the wisdom of our ancestors could actually build a healthier, more just community. And so the wisdom of Indigenous incarcerated people led to a movement that now exists in a lot of our school districts, that is showing up more and more in our prison systems, and is a more effective tool in reducing crime, but also a more effective tool in creating healthier, thriving communities. I said I wasn't going to talk about all of them. I'm sorry. I get really excited about every single one of them because I've got a direct touch with every single one of them. So what organizing by impacted communities looks like. So one of my earliest organizing inspirations was a community of welfare recipients in Philadelphia who launched a nationwide movement based on the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and what it looks like when our organizing work comes from impacted communities. Interfaith work, which you all have a lot of experience with already. I could probably have written a chapter about some of what you all do on that. The Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which is my source of strength and encouragement for the housing justice work I'm engaged in. And I suspect, since you all care a great deal about housing justice, if you haven't looked at Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, I think you would be really fired up by their work, for the work that you all are engaged in. Truth commissions, which are actually being used in neighborhoods, in cities, in states, as we've learned from both the wisdom and the limitations of what happened in South Africa with their Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And then faith-rooted organizing, which, as some of you know, is the model of community organizing that I come from, which was formalized by James Lawson of the Civil Rights Movement, influenced by the Latin American liberation theology movement, the Satyagraha movement of India's liberation movement, and Mahatma Gandhi, and the multi-sectoral organizing work of the Philippines, as well as the United States Black freedom movement of the 1960s. So that's what gets covered in the book. If you haven't read it, now you know. The thing that I didn't realize until the book was already out and published and I was talking about it is the thing that all those case studies had in common. So this isn't in the book, and probably should have been, and if they ask me to rewrite it, I'll probably include a chapter on this. So you get some little insights that no one who just read the book does. Those case studies started with solutions that emerged from the community, and not from, quote unquote experts from outside. They prioritize the experiences of people on the margins. I tell a story from the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative about women who showed up for a community meeting that the neighborhood hadn't been invited to, and they raised their hand and they said, "Why is it you're always talking about us and you're never talking to us about what this community needs?" And how that completely shifted the way the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative worked. It involved the community talking with each other, and this is where some of the asset-based community development work can be really powerful. All of these examples were relational and sustainable over time. So it wasn't about a quick fix, but it was really looking at a bigger vision for what the neighborhood could be, that the people who were of and from that community shaped. They focused on possibilities and not only problems. One of the reasons that I'm particularly compelled by asset-based community development is so often the communities that are the most under-resourced are treated as problems. And what asset-based community development grounds itself in is who we are as resources, what is ignored about us that's valuable, and what possibilities there are for this community instead of just instead of people from outside coming in to fix us. How do we recognize the gifts and contributions that we have to creating a vision for the community that we deserve? Again, all of the ones that I talk about in this book, they don't have the lone rider coming in to rescue the community. They all came from regular people, and every single one of them was collaborative. So that's what the case studies had in common in transforming communities. Yeah. So I'm going to pause here, and then I might ask us a conversation generating question before we move into anything else. So I'm going to stop share, pause here, and see what questions, curiosities, concerns, reflections any of y'all have before I move any further.
And I did figure out how to use how to let everyone into the chat. So if you'd rather use that than unmuting and speaking, you can do that.
That's great. So yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself and just jump in with any thoughts, reflections. And if you've read the book, you're welcome to offer reflections from that. And questions, comments, observations, all welcome.
This is Janet. I've long felt that the solutions need to come from the oppressed, and I guess I got that originally from reading Exodus, where it was the Israelites who said, we got to get out of here, and they provided the solution. So anyway, I agree with that.
I love that you connected that to Exodus, where the Israelites were like, nope, this will not stand, we're gone. It comes from the community, it comes from the people who are suffering under these unjust systems.
And even when Moses tried to provide solutions for them directly from God, they resisted that. I mean, they sort of had to get there on their own time, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It had to be collectively owned and not top down.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I think one of the really interesting parts of this work that I get fired up about is we're not saying there's no role for experts, but the experts need to be invited in by the community based on what the community wants, right? So often, so many of the issues we struggle with, you know, all of us here care deeply about the homelessness crisis, or what some of my friends refer to as the developer crisis, because it was a manufactured crisis. And yeah, I love the fact that, because Moses was an expert, right? He had this direct line from God, but that wasn't really useful to the community until they had determined what it was they wanted, and determined that collectively and in conversation with each other. They had determined the parameters that made sense to them. Yeah, I love that.
And even though he was a Hebrew, he'd been in the Pharaoh's palace. I mean, he was raised in the palace. So class-wise, maybe they were a little suspicious of him.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to, take us down a rabbit hole, but I think this is, it makes it easier to approach our own community, I think, and think about, So our church is really, we have a lot of age diversity, class diversity, less racial diversity, but not none, like definitely not none. I don't want to say we're not good at this, because I think we're really good at lifting lots of different kinds of people into leadership, talking people through that, giving them opportunities that feel right, not too far outside their, like enough outside their comfort zone, in their stretch zone, but not, in their panic zone. And yet one of the things I find really tricky, this is just talking about our own internal congregation, is when there's, how do you sort of deal with, I don't know, I haven't really thought this through, so I'm thinking out loud, like when, how do you deal with minority, whether the minority is age or class or whatever? Like I find that folks who are lower income are less comfortable speaking up because of the stigma of being poor, even though they know they're loved and like intellectually they know they'll be held and received. It's just, it's tricky work to kind of lift those voices up when they know they're in the minority. There's fewer of those voices.
No, I love that you asked that question, because I think part of the work, if we're really serious about creating space for multiple voices, is paying attention to the multiple pathways to communicate. And I really appreciate you naming that, because that's something that tends to get ignored, I think. Popcorn style large group communication works for particular cultural groups. The reason that Eric Law invented mutual invitation which is a means of fostering group dialogue where everybody gets invited to contribute consistently over time, was because he realized that there were certain people who function out of a cultural norm where you don't talk unless someone asks you. And so in a multicultural setting dominated by Western framework, certain people always get talked over. So yeah, looking at the multiple means of communication. In the anti-racism work that I do with the Disciples of Christ, I have stopped by and large having very much large group conversation, because it gets dominated by some folks, and other folks who have been taught over and over that their voice is not particularly valued, don't see any reason to contribute when they know they're not going to get listened to anyhow. We've shifted to mostly it being small group conversation, and also, and here's where this can get scary for some folks with privilege, we caucus. People of color get together and talk about what they need in a space that's going to be safe for them to name all of their issues. White folks get together and talk about the challenges they're having in the space. We report back to each other, so that we can make sure the voices that get talked over historically, traditionally, and all the time today can get heard safely. So that's not necessarily what I'm saying for this conversation, but I think, I don't know that I've ever been a part of caucusing by class. I know I have been a part of caucusing by generation, where we report back to each other. But I think there's something about paying attention to the communication channels we're using and the ways that we listen. When First Christian Church of Oakland started working with First Mongolian Christian Church, it was really stressful because our congregation predominantly, almost all people of color, predominantly Black, but predominantly American culturally, kept running into issues where we would say, you need to do X, and First Mongolian would say, yes, of course we will do X. And then it didn't happen because their understanding of the power dynamic was you are never allowed to say no to people in power, but you can communicate non-verbally. And they were doing all sorts of nonverbal communication that our congregation was not equipped to understand. And so for years, there were misses in communication because we didn't recognize we had all of the power. And so we didn't have to adjust the way we listened. We really had to become very intentional in learning how to cultivate different communication strategies in order to listen.
Can I pause you? Because I think there's so much there that you just said, and I'd love to have people react to it. Does anyone want to speak? Don't be shy. Barbara.
I just want to say amen to everything you said.
Whoops. So wait one sec, Barbara. Michelle said amen. Do you want to say anything else, Michelle? And then I'll unmute
That's
Barbara.
it.
Okay.
That's it.
Barbara, you're unmuted.
Okay, great. First, because I didn't get a chance to say it before, I wanted to thank you so much for your sermon today, which was really, really wonderful. loved it. And in answer to that question, I found in my work with youth in Oakland, which is when I think I first got to know the Peace Center, was to make sure to like not make assumptions. That no one should make assumptions of each other based on age or any, anything. And that listening is so much of the battle, just really listening. So for instance, young Latino woman would not be used to being listened to. But if you just devoted your full attention to listening to them and gave them a platform like a blog to put their words on, they blossomed. So.
Oh my gosh, I want other people to respond, but Barbara, that just reminded me of, so there was at one point, and some of you may have worked with them, there was a Catholic worker house in the Fruitvale in Oakland. And if you all know about I suspect many of you know about the Catholic worker house in Berkeley. And so the Catholic worker house in the Fruitvale, launched by radical powerhouse white Christian folks, found themselves in a Latino community, found that the community dialogues they had every week still ended up with the white people taking up most of the space. They did a lot of sitting with this and having one-to-one conversations to learn why that was happening. And what they found they needed to restructure things to was for the Latina women to gather first by themselves to talk through what agenda items they wanted to make sure got addressed, then to have a little time where the Latino men joined them and figured out collectively what additional things that whole group wanted to make sure were a part of the agenda, and then convened the group, which was then led by the Latinx folks from the neighborhood. And that shift where who led was changed, whose voices came first was changed very intentionally, was what allowed them to actually do the work that the neighborhood needed. And so what you're saying about like the listening is really a critical part of that. And the listening to the folks whose first response, and I've certainly, you may not believe this because I talk so much, I've been taught my whole life that my voice didn't matter all that much. And I had to be invited into speaking into spaces as an Asian woman, right? Into Asian mixed gender spaces, into white spaces. So the ways in which we intentionally listen, prioritize, center, and create leadership opportunities with and for folks on the margins matters. Yeah, I appreciate, and all of that comes from the listening that you're talking about, Barbara.
You know, it resonates with me what you're saying, coming from the diverse community of persons with disabilities. Often the invitation of being able to provide a perspective that is very on key to what we're talking about, like within our own community, we have diverse communities within that, and cultural things we have to be aware of. And of course, we have language differences, and we have other types of differences of people using different devices or assistive technology to talk. And I was just on a Zoom thing the other day in discussion, and even within sometimes our own community, we don't give pause to somebody who might be using a voice box to speak. We don't give pause for that because we're not accustomed to it culturally. Like, we're not all the time, you can't be perfect at everything. But it is nice. I've noticed in the community, we acknowledge that. We acknowledge our imperfections. We call it out within our meeting, and nobody takes offense to it. It gives you a reminder, oh, okay, so we have a different speaker here today, and they have a voice box, and we need to give them time to type in the answer. so that we can all hear, what the person's saying. So it's the ability to feel comfortable enough to call it out, and I'm more comfortable in the community of persons with disabilities because the culture is call it out. In other communities, sometimes I call it out too strong, and I have to also understand it's a new thing for people. Yeah.
I really appreciate you raising that. I wonder, Helen, if you've been thinking about the same thing. I've been finding that these past few weeks have created so many moments where people are being confronted with how ableist our day-to-day ways of doing business are, and that there are avenues, and this is about accessibility, which is different than justice, that there are avenues being opened.
It's the same thing. It is justice.
Well, yeah. No, I think, I think.
You don't have a bathroom on a plane.
Right.
And everybody on the plane shouldn't have a bathroom either.
Right.
Because you're asking a person who also wants to fly like you, that they have to put on diapers in order to fly.
Exactly. So there's, it's a very basic human dignity issue. Yeah. And so I find myself thinking right now, we're being forced to use avenues that suddenly allow a lot of folks who were shut out of our organizing work, were shut out of our faith community gatherings, to be able to be present. We haven't learned yet the listening that Barbara was talking about, but I kind of feel like the disability justice movement and the disability rights movements both have an awful lot to teach us about this moment that I hope we won't lose when we someday go back to being able to be physically present with each other the way we were before this crisis hit.
I think the community at large, because I'm very involved in that community, is we've been, discussing that too, like how could we are solutions, and how can people start to realize, we were talking earlier, you have these leaders that come in that are supposedly the experts, but in the disability culture, that's a medical model, people telling you how to fix it. And in the disability culture, we don't want to be fixed, and the solutions are about working with what you have, discovering it, and being empowered enough to be able to give your attempt to try, and people appreciating that. There is inspiration there. We love that kind of inspiration, but yeah.
Thanks for that. Absolutely.
Can I just add that there's just people with disabilities who are concerned that they're going to be sacrificed in this pandemic because only the healthy people who have a chance to survive are going to be treated, and the people who have pre-existing conditions or severe disabilities or health conditions are going to be let go.
Yeah, everybody here could write a letter about that and bring it to the attention, because that's what we've been working on, is ensuring that everybody, it's a justice issue, it's not a medical model issue. A person who has a ventilator, that ventilator should not be taken away just because they have the virus and you think they will not survive. It's not right.
Any other thoughts, reflections? Oh, good. Molly, you were about to jump in and do the exact same thing, weren't you?
I was about to do the same thing.
Yeah. Because I recognize we're at 10 till 1, and so 10 till 1 is not a great time for me to be like, and now I would like to introduce you to this organizing methodology that usually I spend 3 hours talking about. Not just talking about, but like doing exercises and dreaming together and talking about how it can be applied and how to make sure that marginalized voices are centered in how it's done and all of that stuff.
Do we want to spend just a couple
when can we have you back to
What?
Yeah.
I said, when can we have her back to do that?
Oh, she's our neighbor. She's right here.
Anytime I can talk about SS-based community development, I'm going to do it. I'm about it.
do we want to take just a few minutes? I sent Shonda the vision we passed last September, which of course has 3 parts, one of which is growing in intimacy as the weird and wonderful body of Christ, which I feel is happening. One of which is new forms of worship, which is definitely happening. And the third, which is end homelessness in the East Bay, which is happening on a lot of different fronts. And yet in some ways it feels like the most enormous, the most untenable. Do we want to ask questions, offer worries, try things out with Shonda right here, right now, since we have someone who's so deeply connected to so many organizations and to the movement work?
I worry about not being able to be there in the flesh in supporting, say, the women who are taking over houses, or those who are protesting, the folks who are holding on to houses and not letting them be shared, and wanting to know how someone from the majority community like myself can still fit into whatever space there is in this separated time to support that.
And Molly, did you want us to take a few of those questions before I go in, or do you want me to handle that one at a time?
Yeah, well, 12:53. Let's handle it one at a time, and we might not, we could probably talk for another hour, but we'll at least start to generate some heat around that.
So I love that. And if you all will forgive me for this, I tend, well, you can tell by how the Oakland Peace Center emerged out of our church connecting with other groups who were already doing the kind of work that we cared about. So similarly with this, the folks who are on the front lines of that work, and they are looking for online activist partners, you all may be familiar with ACE, the Alliance of, oh gosh, I don't remember what it stands for, ACCE.
We'll find out.
Yeah, somebody look them up.
I'll
ACE.
Google it while you're talking.
I'm so ashamed that I don't know what that stands for.
It's okay.
Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, let's say, something like that. They were the ones who supported the unsheltered mothers and their babies who moved into that house in West Oakland. And their lead organizer, Carol Fife, is one of the most powerhouse people you will ever come across. Deeply faithful woman, comes out of a Black liberationist perspective, really, really powerful community leader. What's great is they actually have an arm called ACE Allies, I think, that is specifically for white folks and folks like me, folks who come from some economic privilege. I own an apartment, so where we can show up as allies, where they can kind of reach out to us and say, here's what we need you to do on our behalf. Oh, look, I guessed the acronym right. Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. That's great. Thank you.
We'll check them out and see how we can help.
Yeah, so they definitely want us to, because the tragedy of even the best of our city council leadership, because Berkeley and Oakland in many ways are ahead of the curve. But the fact of the matter is, even my city council member who represents West Oakland is more likely to listen to a homeowner than a homeless person. And she's kind of said that publicly. And so our voices, for those of us who, even if we're housing insecure, actually have a roof over our heads, our voices carry an unfair weight. And so to get plugged in where we can be listening to the wisdom and direction of the people most impacted by a particularly racist homelessness crisis, where the last statistic I saw was that 2/3 of the homeless population of Oakland were actually African American men. because of the fact that there are racist economic structures and policies, and redlining still exists in its own way, and because the neighborhoods where people want to profit were historically places that housed our, at the time, majority Black community. All of those things have kind of combined to create a system that is racist as well as economically unjust. To listen to impacted people for their guidance about how we can act is a real gift to us, I think. I should not have answered that for so long. Y'all know that this is my passion point, so I talk way too much. I'm going to pause and listen for other questions.
Okay, we've got something. Thanks.
And seriously, look up Carol Fife.
Yes.
It is like listening to a preacher. She is so powerful. She's one of my sheroes. I'll tell you what, because I know we're almost at time, there's one thing I want to throw into the mix, because I've been really appreciative of how seriously this congregation takes its role in lifting up the well-being of our unsheltered siblings. One of the things that has helped me do this work better, and I keep struggling to do it well, is I try my best to be listening to and learning from folks like Poor Magazine,
Yeah.
folks like the East Oakland Collective, folks like The Village, which is the informal network of folks building tiny homes right now in the San Antonio neighborhood of Oakland. I do my best to listen to the networks that were created by homeless and sometimes not homeless, but previously homeless folks. I will say several of the folks I've talked with have said, when I was homeless, all I had the bandwidth to do was survive. I needed to get shelter before I could become the activist my community needed. But sometimes, and in Berkeley this is very true, there are activists who are living in tents right at the Oakland-Berkeley border. Doing my best to get wisdom from them before I try to take action around homeless justice issues has been really a guiding force that has shaped me in good ways, and that I hope is and will continue to shape how you're engaging this work.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Shonda. This has been really expansive for me. I mean, I know vaguely or less vaguely about all of this stuff, but you just connected some dots for me.
Yay.
In particular. You know, I read everything that comes through the pipeline about the homelessness crisis. I love hearing it reframed as a developer crisis and not a homeless. You think about it totally differently.
Yeah.
And who, you know, what the mechanisms are that make and keep people homeless. But I think I've been thinking too narrowly that building housing, you know, we're so far behind, decades behind in building enough of every kind of housing, particularly affordable housing, but there's so many other creative ways to be working on this, from looking at gentrification, displacement, how many empty homes there are, you know, 4 times as many as unhoused people. Just so, you know, we don't have to wait 10 years till we can get enough housing built.
Right.
There's solutions right now.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. We love having you with us.
I'm always grateful to be with y'all. I'm so glad that we got to connect, even if it wasn't in person, with lots of hugs.
Yes.
Yay.
I'll offer up a little brief prayer and then we'll say bye, okay?
Beautiful.
Holy, Holy One, thank you that pandemic cannot keep us from having rich, theological, activist conversations about how to move your world forward. In fact, you didn't send this disaster, but you'll use it to create the pain points and the passion points that we need to open up our consciousness and understand where as a people you're moving us next. We thank you for Shonda, for her voice and wisdom, for all those to whom she is pointing, who will become the next folks we'll listen to learn and understand what it is you call us to be and do in the world. hold us, bless us, protect us, surround us with a hedge of protection against this virus, that we may stay here and keep doing the work you call us to do. We pray in the strong name of Jesus, the healer, our true King. Amen.
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 Thanks,
y'all.
everybody. Have a great day.
So grateful to be with you.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.